Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's so funny.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Good
But it's different spelling
afternoon.
from yours.
Yeah. I'm the vice president of Zhisland International USA here in Chicago. It is our greatest honor to welcome all of you to this roundtable discussion. This is our, very first bi-monthly, discussion, and the topic for this one is going to be how to succeed as an entrepreneur. And we've invited a number of very experienced, speakers. Some of them are entrepreneurs to begin with, and so they will, share their stories with you. And I would like to, turn this over to Mr. Professor Lloyd Shevsky, and you can see his title there. He's the clinical professor of entrepreneurship at Kellogg School, and also he's the founder and co-director of the School Center for Family. And thank you so much, Lloyd.
Thank you. Actually, 2 years ago, I retired from Kellogg, but I still do all the consulting and other work that I've been doing. And I should, given the crowd that's here, I should also say I'm the founder of the Center for Executive Women at Kellogg. So, entrepreneurship, I want to put this in some perspective. I started studying the subject in the mid-1980s. I could not find a book. There were 2 books, actually. They were horrible. And one of them is still a friend of mine. The other guy died, but his book died before he did. It was just an awful scene, and I decided to do research to learn about entrepreneurship. That's how I got involved in this, and eventually, by 1995, wrote a book called Entrepreneurs Are Made, Not Born. And that book was a bestseller in 8 languages, including Chinese. And I learned one important thing in that research. I learned that all the articles I read about entrepreneurs, all the speeches I heard, were blatantly wrong. They all talked about it in what I call and you all know these traits and characteristics. We've all heard them a million times. And you mix them together and put it in the oven, and out will come an entrepreneur. What I quickly realized, out would come anyone successful. So it could be an athlete, it could be a musician. And there's a wonderful story I'll share with you, a true story, about Isaac Perlman, the violinist, probably the greatest violinist in our lifetime. And Isaac Perlman was giving a concert, and at the beginning of the concert, I don't know if you know this, he had polio, so it's an ordeal to watch him come out and get into the chair, and it's just horrible to watch, difficult. And so he goes through this whole thing, the orchestra starts, and he starts, and everyone in the audience could hear it, the twang of a string breaking. Now what you have to do then is go get your violin fixed, put on the string, and come back. But for him to walk off, get that done, come back, would have been an ordeal, and everybody was just silent. And he turns to the conductor, and he nods that they should start playing again. And there's a gasp in the audience. He played that concert with 3 strings like it had never been played before. Place went into an uproar afterwards, and he tapped with the bow on the music stand, and everyone stopped applauding, and he said, "There's a lesson here. Everyone has to make do with what they have." Now, coming from him, it was doubly profound, but it's true of entrepreneurs too. There are entrepreneurs who I used to say they open a newsstand. Nobody opens a newsstand anymore. So they open a hot dog restaurant or a noodle restaurant, not terribly different from everyone else's, and they're an entrepreneur. And then there are guys in Silicon Valley who are starting businesses that haven't started yet, and they're valued in the billions of dollars. And they're entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs come in all sizes and flavors, and you really have to be pretty careful about what you mean when you say entrepreneur. So the entrepreneur who starts a hot dog stand might feel very successful if he makes enough to live. And if he makes enough to send his kids to college, he's a titan of hot dog stands. And a guy in Silicon Valley who only makes $100 million might feel like a failure. So it's all relative, and you've really got to keep that in mind when you define what an entrepreneur is and what success is. There are a couple of things that entrepreneurs all have in common. they want to be their own boss. And that's for different reasons. Sometimes they hated their own boss. Sometimes they thought they were better than their own boss. Sometimes they just wanted to try it. And sometimes it's for psychiatric problems. They can't deal with any authority. But that's okay. They become entrepreneurs. I don't know if you know this. A huge percentage of entrepreneurs are dyslexic. Huge. So disproportionate that when I started doing research on it, I did it because one of my guests in class was, I just went blank on his name, the founder of Kinko's. Remember Kinko's, the printing places that were then merged out of existence? He started it on a strange thing. He lived in California, lived up in the Riverside. No, it was actually further north than that. And he came down to San Diego and saw a printing store. These were new. These were Xerox machine printing stores. And it was new. And he stood outside, watched what was going on, then got up the nerve to go in and look around, and then came out, stopped people as they were leaving saying, did you get what you wanted? Were you served the way you wanted to be served? Did they accomplish whatever your goal was? And then moved back up north and opened the first store of Kinko's. It was called Kinko's because he had real curly hair. And by the time I got him into class, he was bald. So it ruined that whole story. But the lesson there was amazing because as he talked, at Kellogg, we have these auditorium type seating arrangements. He went up the first step and kicked the step over and over continually through his entire presentation. Well, I found out the ADHD and the dyslexia are related. Then he had written a book, so he was going to autograph it for one of the students. I looked over his shoulder and he was writing it backwards. He was totally dyslexic. And that made me want to find out more. I didn't want to presume to ask him, but I did research, and it's an amazing percentage of dyslexic, ADHD, all the ailments you can imagine. There's another thing, I really talk about this more in my third book on visionaries are made, not born. And this has to do with something that we are all taught in school and at home not to do. We're taught not to be copycats. We're taught, first of all, not to copy somebody else's paper or exam. Well, that's the way it should be, not to copy that. But we're taught beyond that. You know, it's an attempt by people from a long time ago to make kids more innovative, more thinking out of the box, all those good phrases. And it's true, they should be taught that, but not by saying don't copy. Because the vast majority of new businesses, when I say vast, I'm talking 95+% are copycats. You know, they tweak it a little bit, or they add a little something, or they move it to a different geographical place, but it's still copycat stuff, and that's okay. In fact, visionaries, good visionaries, many of them are copycats. You can count on one hand the people who have really originated a new idea. And that's why people confuse inventors and entrepreneurs. The definition of inventors comes from the definition of invent, which comes from patent rules. And if you go to the patent rules, it has to be unique, new, meaning in effect it's never been thought of before. I mean, that's what they're really trying to say. Well, we know that entrepreneurs do things other people have thought of and actually things other people have done. And they do it without the protection of patents, and they succeed and make fortunes and help their employees and shareholders and community and everything else. So you have to be careful about that too. Another thought. Somebody once asked me why such a high percentage of entrepreneurs fail. Do you know the statistics on this?
92%.
90 to 95, but 92 is good enough. Incidentally, it's the same percentage that the third generation of a family business, 90% of them do not make it successfully through the third generation. So there's something interesting going on there. And it struck me that those are two similar but very different concepts. One has to do with the entrepreneur, what I would call the first generation of a business. The other has to do with the third generation of the family business. So what's this time difference? And as I was reading, you may not know this, but Ewing Kauffman owned, it starts with an M, big pharmaceutical firm in Kansas. And when he died, now this is 25 years ago, no, it's more like 30 years ago. When Ewing died, he left $1 billion. Now imagine what $1 billion was 30 years ago. Left $1 billion for the study of entrepreneurship. And they now have many billions in their foundation through the country on entrepreneurship, better than any school has done. And they published a paper, you'd have trouble finding it. It was so obscure, I lucked into finding it. And they determined that entrepreneurs fail, and then they gave you percentages by year. And it turned out that only about 40% failed in the first couple of years. 90% by about the 7th year. And then, the long tail period, the long tail just went out forever. So, you it was less than 90 in the 7th year, and you got to 90 eventually on the long tail. But the principle of that told me that there's something else going on. And it wasn't a failure of entrepreneurship that caused these businesses to fail. It was a failure to reinvent the business they started. And that's why my second book, Invent, Reinvent, Thrive, was about that. The failures that we've all looked at and maybe hopefully didn't invest in are the failures that just couldn't readjust their entrepreneurial business. And so if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, it's not a cataclysmic event that you start a business and you're an entrepreneur, not even a year later that you're successful. It has to last. Maybe you get bought out, but it has to last until there's a liquidity event or something. And in order to do that, you're going to have to pivot against your own notion. Do you all know who Danny Kahneman is? Danny Kahneman? So Danny Kahneman is the only Nobel laureate in economics who is not an economist. He's a psychologist. And he was the start of behavioral economics, which now is everywhere. And he only wrote one book in his life. He wrote many papers. And we were at lunch one day, and I said, so I read your book. I've read all your papers. Your book is just a summary of the papers. He said, well, that's what it was intended to be. I said, but, instead of all that summarizing of all your old theories and experiments, could you give like a 10-second summary of all this? Or what's the most important lesson you could teach people? He sat there for a little bit and he said, okay, I'll give you one. He said, the hardest thing for a human being to do is to disagree with their most recent decision. Now, he told me that about 8 years ago. I can't tell you that it's every minute of 8 years, but a lot of time in those 8 years, I tried applying that to what people were doing, and it's perfect. I mean, it really fits. So think about it when it's your own last thought or your own last decision might have been the start of your business. How are you going to change from that to do something else, to reinvent it? I mean, you're doing the toughest thing behavioral economics can teach you to do. So there's an important lesson there. And if you can't do it yourself, and now I'm going to digress quickly before I run out of time, to China and the United States entrepreneurship. There are people here who have done much more in China in entrepreneurship than I, so I'll leave it to some of them and then to all of you in the discussion. But I want to point to one thing where I think China has to catch up. I mean, they catch up beautifully, as you all know. They just catch up in far less time than we took to do things. They have the advantage of coming in later to the system, but that's okay, it's working. One place is not working, and that's governance. Chinese business people, due to a certain lack of trust other than family and things like that, don't have governance systems the way we do in the United States, meaning boards of directors. I mean, the extreme activity of Chinese business people towards governance is to have a board of advisors. Now, there's nothing wrong with a board of advisors, but I think it demonstrates they can't go that extra yard to get to a real board of directors. When they go public, they have to. So, you find people whose companies went public and SEC or other countries' organizations' requirements say they must. But short of that, you don't find that happening. And I found that the best guidance, not just to stop people, but to protrude into new areas, to get out of the box, to help executives get out of the box, is boards of directors. And so I think that's an area where China has some ways to go. Okay, so those are my thoughts. You can think about them as you wish. and we'll come back to that. Now we're going to go to some of the panelists. George?
Okay. So I thought what I would do is give a little perspective. I think Lloyd's given an overview of an individual as an entrepreneur, but I think over years we've learned something, at least in the United States. And if you look back 10 years, you probably didn't have any incubators. You definitely didn't have any accelerators or anything like that. But over time, I think we've learned that there are certain things that can help individuals be more successful. So first started out, and then you have some big names like WeWork, which has a ridiculous valuation. And they were created as co-working spaces just to bring people together. You know, like we're here, you know, we've got a common thought, a common idea. They would bring people together who wanted to start a business, let them share a space. So stage one was what they called the incubator space. Stage two are actually with the shared workspace, co-working space. Stage two was more of an incubator space. And that was not only bringing people together, but bringing people together that have common interests. So if you're starting a business, what do you need? Well, if you're early on, you probably need a lawyer to determine, you know, should you be, at least in the U.S., an LLC, C Corp, what should your structure be? How are you going to set up your books? How are you going to set up your accounting? If you're going to have a partner, you know, how do we share? How do we divide the equity in the organization? So you started to see more of the incubator model come into play. And what happens with a lot of the incubators, so previous to this, I worked in help building 1871. We had over 500 companies, running over 500 mentors to do things, but the individual is still left on their own. So we've gone from nothing to 500 mentors. You as a company, how do you know who to meet with and when? Yeah, so you get so many sources. It's not just, they used to say, you know, before it used to be hard to get data. Now you got all the data you want. It's like, what do you do with it? So that's sort of evolved now to where we are with the accelerators. And here, you know, at FinTech, we do have an accelerator where we work with companies. And to your point, we provide them with a board. It's advisors because there's legal concepts that come into play if you have it as a board of directors, liability, and other things. So what we do when we work with companies, we basically bring them in, see where they're at. And it should be noted that not all entrepreneurs are startup entrepreneurs. Some schools, Northwestern, University of Chicago, they've come up with new programs in the last couple of years called ETA, Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition. And what these are quite often is individuals that go to school, work on a master's type degree, and when they get ready to graduate or finish the program, they look for companies that are for sale. So these are usually existing companies by a single owner. A friend of mine just sold a burglar alarm type company to a student that had gone through the program. And it's interesting to see the dynamics. I don't know if you experience it with your family ownership. Yeah, so they come in and try to take over, but there's also a lot of challenges. So even if you go through, you know, master's program and they prepare you on how to come in and take over a company and say, okay, here's how you do the accounting, here's how you do the legal aspects, you're still part of running a business that's unique. So through having an accelerator, for example, like we have, or going through a program where it's like an entrepreneurship through acquisition type model, how do you learn the skills and develop some of those skills to make you more effective in the environment? And that's what we try to do. So with our program here at FinTech, we bring individuals in as an organization. We sit down. We start out by having them create a pitch deck. We invite in a group, usually 20, 25 individuals, lawyers, accountants, marketing people, IT people. They have to give their pitch too. And their pitch is, you know, who you are, what you do, and why should anybody in the room care? If people are going to help you, you know, how can they help you? So from that process, we try to get an understanding of what they do. And then the board, the individuals in the room, then decide if they have an interest and can they help them. You know, what does this board get in return? So, for example, right now we've got one company we're working with, and we're fortunate they've got a board, they've got individuals from Accenture and a few other organizations on their board. And it's a senior level person from Accenture. So I stopped the person from Accenture and I said, I'm curious, why are you on the board of a startup company? You're not getting paid. There's no revenue. You know, working for a consulting firm, you're all focused on billable hours. And his response to me, which I thought was interesting, is in corporate America, too often large corporations are more worried about failure than another success. So they don't try new things. Where entrepreneurs and startups have an advantage is if you fail, what do you lose? You lose a little bit of time, a little bit of money, but you can come back. It's not like in certain countries or certain cultures where if you fail, your family's disgraced forever. You know, you can't do it. So here in America, the approach has been try something. If you're a startup and you fail, regroup and come back. So that's an advantage, you know, over large organizations. because the larger organizations, and to your point, a lot of them do fail because they don't change. You know, on average, if you look over any 10-year period of time, the Fortune 500, these are the biggest companies, over any 10-year period of time, on average, about half of those companies fall off that list and new companies come on. So again, even if you think back 10 years, you know, how many airlines existed then that don't exist now? You know, auto companies, computer companies, you know, so many things change. So I think a key theme of this is the ability to change, understand what can you do that's better, faster, cheaper, or create life in a new way that people aren't used to. And I think with time, we've evolved from leaving an individual just because they had an idea to coming up with models that can help. And those being, again, early on, co-working spaces, incubators, accelerators. I think what you're going to see more of is you'll see that not only are these advisory boards getting involved to give ideas, but they will invest money and stay more engaged on a longer term perspective. So I think that's something, you know, depending on where you are, either starting a company or supporting a company, I think people want to see the commitment. There's so many ideas out there. I get easily 100 packets a week that say, look at my company, we need money. But if everybody's asking you for money, how do they stand out? How are you going to stand out from somebody else? And there's just so many people looking for money. It's like, it's not just about money. It's how can we work with you to make a difference? I'll give you a personal example. A few years back, there was a company called Home Chef. Yeah. And they were one of the home delivery. They just got acquired by Kroger.
The investor, he's coming later today, has a meeting at 3. He will come back after. He's the one who made the early investment when it was only valued at $1 million. He basically came out of McKinsey. He brought all the initial team from McKinsey. He's the one he invested and he built a team from McKinsey. But he's an entrepreneur now. He's like been an entrepreneur for a year. After Home Chef success, he's building a company from
after
scratch.
the success, they don't have to do anything. But so at the time,
entrepreneur.
what got me to invest at the time. So we're going back a couple of years.
Great.
So it was a couple of guys. They had a little warehouse on the near west side. Okay. And I spoke to the person who started the company. And I said, what caused you to start this? And he said, well, me and my wife were both in California working as accountants. I didn't like it, but I had a passion for cooking and entertainment. I couldn't figure out a way to make it as a success in entertainment. But I think there's this new concept where, and Home Chef, what they do is they package the foods together and send it to your house. So every day it comes packaged, all the ingredients, just take it out of the box and cook it or make it. It works pretty well, $9.95 a meal. And my question at the time was, how are you going to make money doing this? And then he took me into his operation, and it was a small, but it was very a long table, boxes, all the different food ingredients. Took me into their cooler, you know, where they kept the cooled items, and he packed it in these packets. And then he said, this is how we're going to do it. And what got me at the time was it wasn't just one individual. So you talk about individuals and personality. It was an individual, but he had a team around him.
Yeah.
He had a team around him of very young people at the time. I don't know.
All from McKinsey.
McKinsey, Bain. There was one from Bain.
From Bain.
There were a few other ones. And what got me to invest at the time was I thought the idea was a little bit unique, but also the individuals and their passion for wanting to make this succeed. And there was other companies in the space, you know, Blue Apron out of New York, which went public, has not done well. There's another one out of Germany, which is doing so-so. But his idea at the time was, you know, build this and then turn it into something. And then recently, they just sold to Kroger. They did very well. But what I think was also interesting about that acquisition, it wasn't just a one-time acquisition.
Right.
It's over 5 years.
Yeah.
So the people who invested early on got about 18 times their money back. But there's incentives for that to keep growing over the next 5 years. So they kept it as a wholly owned subsidiary. And if they're continue to be successful, drive success, all of the investors that invested early on will continue to be more successful. So that's an example of, you know, one organization that started, they got into a market space that they felt was unique. They had an advantage by the people they brought in to work together. Their business model, rather than trying to go public, they worked within because they felt if they could get into a bigger organization, they'd have more impact. And that's an example of a success. Now, there are a lot of failures for every success. I also invested in a group out of University of Chicago, a bunch of medical doctors, and wow, what a great thing they created. And if I tell you the product, they created it was called Prescript IQ. And what they created was a product where they would take a DNA sample And from your DNA sample, they could tell you what medicines would be more effective for you and less effective. Good idea? It was good. I thought it was a good idea. It was a good enough idea. It was a good enough idea to get me to invest. And I was so impressed when the doctors came out and talked about, this is what we're doing. This is our research. Company went out of business less than a year later. So
pharmaceutical research changing, education's changing, business changing.
Well, no, what I learned from that is just because somebody's a medical doctor and has a lot of education doesn't mean they're a good business person. They were so comfortable with their day jobs. They're all making a couple $100,000 a year. Okay, they didn't have a career change. You're making a couple $100,000 a year. Where's your incentive? Yeah, they wanted to make millions, but were they going to risk their day job for the rest of the job? No. So as a result, we lost all our money in that investment. So I think some points, when you look at this,
George, do you think there was also a solution looking for the need?
I think it's still a great solution.
Yeah,
and if I could take that over, I think there is actually, because if from a DNA sample, little swab, they could predict.
No, I think it's a great idea, but I don't think people care yet.
Well, there's two parts to that. I think the biggest failure was still the doctors.
Well, I think
that's what I think. The second problem is, at least in the U.S., the way we're structured with healthcare. A whole nother issue. But you got to look at it, but a good point. So one is looking at the team. The other thing is looking at the larger ecosystem. So if you went to the doctor and you said, wow, this sounds like a really great test. Let me give you a DNA sample so you can tell what medications I'd be more effective or not. And the doctor says, right, that'll cost you $100. Most Americans are trained what? You have your insurance. Wait, I pay my, whatever it is, $1,500 a month for insurance. Why would I pay an extra $100? So at this point in time, that was not an approved thing by insurance. So you have other things that come into play. So good point. It's not just the individuals, the idea, the concept, what people are used to, the laws and regulations, and those change by country. So I think those are all things that come into play. So on the good side, home chef, dedicated people, full-time, unique idea, wanting to make something happen. But again, it's food, packaging food. It's like, no, I wasn't impressed with the concept or the idea. What got me to invest in that company was the individuals. On the other side, with Prescript IQ, I thought it was a great idea. And these were all medical doctors. You're like, wow, they're all MDs. This is a good thing. But there wasn't the dedication or the initiative to drive this product forward. So you have to look at a lot of different factors when you're looking at entrepreneurship.
I think the most important thing, and there's a couple of great lessons that you said today, had to do with the acquisition concept. And on both sides, acquisition, entrepreneurship by acquisition, we don't think about that enough. And it's not just guys at graduate business school. There are a load of people out there who, executives who leave a big company either for early retirement or they just can't stand the grindstone anymore. There's a lot of that out there, and it's really worth looking at. And the second part, on the other end, we all, there's a glamour to an IPO, and less than a 1,000th of 1% should be in an IPO. And the people who should be in an IPO, it immediately. I mean, I used to take people public, and I knew immediately if they should or shouldn't based on them and their team. In the old days, if you had $50 million in sales, you could do an IPO. In more recent times, it was said to be $100 million. I'm saying today, it's somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion before you should even think of doing an IPO, unless you've got a change the world science or something like that. Because most teams don't have the wherewithal to be in two businesses at once. The business you're in and the business of being a public company. And it's very burdensome. Yep.
Well, I guess it's my turn to jump in. I had an idea that popped into my head as I was coming down here, so I want you to indulge me for a second. I'm going to bookend my 10 minutes with a riddle that I think is relevant to not only my personal experience in the work that I do, but also this general conversation about entrepreneurship in China. So the riddle, if you're a fan of 80s movies, you may have heard this before. I first heard this riddle when I was a young boy during summer camp. One of my counselors told this to me. But if you watch the movie Labyrinth, you may have heard this riddle before. So here's how it goes. A weary traveler is going down the road, and a traveler turns a corner and comes upon a fork in the road, and there are three people. One person in front of each fork. It's a two-pronged road, and one person standing in front of them in the center. The person in the center says, one of these roads will lead to certain failure. The other road will lead to certain success. And then he points and references the two people in front of either road. And he adds the next stipulation is one of these people will always lie. No matter what, that person will always lie. And the other person, no matter what, will always tell the truth. Then the third and final stipulation is you can ask one of the people one question to determine which road to take. What question do you ask? And then poof, the person in the center disappears. And there's two people left, one in front of each road, and the traveler is left with one question to ask. So as I'm speaking, think on that riddle and what you would ask to get down the road to success as opposed to the road to failure. So my story, who am I? My name is Bill Strandberg. I have an executive search firm. I'm a second generation in a family business. The business was founded by my father, who was an entrepreneur. He's founded the business in the 70s. In the downturn of the economic downturn of the 80s, he was at that time Coopers & Lybrand, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers, had an executive search firm, and they let him go as a part of the downsizing of the business. At this time, I'm a young kid, and my dad is all of a sudden out of a job. He decides to bootstrap his own business and builds something. We're going to be in our 30th year. We're going into our 29th year, actually, in September, so we're coming up on our 30th birthday next year. So fingers crossed we make it that far. I grew up as the son of an executive search consultant, and that is not a business a child can participate in. There's nothing you can do. There's, maybe shuffle a little bit of paper around, but there's no shop floor. Yeah, the whole world of executive search is speaking to people about very, very difficult decisions. You're speaking with clients about the risk involved of making a hiring decision and what if it goes wrong. Not only are you losing a lot of money on the investment in a person, you're losing all of the time in the discovery of whether or not that person's going to succeed. So no, a 14-year-old has no value proposition to that business model. So I instead followed my own passions, and I went through college. I majored in Mandarin, and I moved to Chengdu, Sichuan. And I lived there for 6 years. And I found myself an entrepreneur, not precisely by design. I kind of just wound up in a circumstance where I was the only show in town. I had played college tennis, and I was working at a restaurant that as an event manager. So I put together things like this for the expatriate community in Chengdu. And they had, as a part of their clientele, the large portion of their clientele were international expatriates. So Intel would send families over, and there'd be families with little kids, and there's children under 10 years old, and their parents are like, we don't have any after school activities. There's plenty to do in China, by the way, but they didn't know how to access it. And they learned that I play tennis. They said, Bill, can you teach my kids some tennis after school? So I said yes. Immediately on my first lesson, as I speak some Chinese, I had to book the court with a local business, et cetera, et cetera. I was immediately noticed by a market that was starving for something that they didn't know they needed, which was someone who could teach sports and English simultaneously. So I was the only show in town, and poof, I had a business overnight. And this led to some good and bad things. There's a book that I read recently called The Toilet Paper Entrepreneur. And it's a little crass, but I'm going to give you the basic understanding of the idea, the thesis behind this book. If you walk into the bathroom and there's 3 sheets of toilet paper, you are a great entrepreneur. You know how to manage your resources perfectly. You know exactly what to do. You'll get perfect amount of value out of what you choose to do in that circumstance. However, if you've got a giant roll in front of you or a surplus, you are no longer necessarily going to be managing your resources well. You're no longer concerned about how much to use at a given time. So that's the thesis. of the toilet paper entrepreneur, and it only applies in circumstances where you are an entrepreneur that has limited resources. You're not going with an idea and getting funding from something like George or FinTech. You're saying, I'm going to bootstrap this and do it myself. So I have $10 to spend. What am I going to do? And that's the sort of entrepreneur that I was. So I built a model that took me from having one student to over 500 students, from being a single coach to having a team of coaches, both international background, typically American, and Chinese background, both. I had what I would call software. So what I mean by that is hardware would be an actual, a physical location, like a tennis club, for example. And software would be the program that I would run. So I didn't have a physical location. Instead, I would install this software at various locations. I expanded it into different sports. So the same idea that applies to tennis can also be put into basketball or baseball or anything, soccer, whatever is popular. So I built this, and it grew, and it was a big successful circumstance. And then I got into a whole bunch of problems. Problem number one is something that a word that Lloyd used earlier is relevant here, is copycat. My business model was very clear to anyone in Purview, something that they could copy, and people began to do it. So protecting that model is hard. Particularly when I don't have as strong relationships with the local community as a Chinese person who's gonna kind of help connect that, and which is what happened. So the competitors that popped up, there was a couple Western tennis coaches that kind of followed behind me, but then there were Chinese entrepreneurs who, one tennis player plus money backing from an entrepreneur is a value proposition that I had a hard time competing against, largely because they were more than happy to operate in renminbi. I was going to be in a circumstance where I needed to get my money out of China in dollars, which goes back to something that if I had read Lloyd's book and took in some advice when I was in this place and circumstance, I would have had better planning in place to put all of this together. So I was put in a circumstance where I had an opportunity to take my business forward, but it would have required a joint venture with a Chinese investor. So I'm in a space now. I'm young. I don't have nearly the wealth of experience as either Lloyd or George, so I don't have a lot to go on outside of my instincts, and all advisors want money, which I only have a limited. Right? So I kind of left my own wiles here, and I could not find a circumstance that I could trust. There was a very strong viability that I could have taken my business to every major city in China with a trustworthy business partner, and I could have been, a millionaire multiple times over if I'd made the right decisions and I navigated it correctly. Problem is there's so many pit holes and falls and crevices or minefields that none of which I had the capacity to see, nor did I have anyone that I trusted that could guide me through them. So despite the fact that there was a pot of gold there, I decided that it was not worth risking my life to go down that road. So around that time, I gave my father a call. I've been living in China for 6 years, and he's in this point in his early 60s. And is concerned about his own succession plan, about what's going to happen to this business that he put his own blood, sweat, and tears into. My sister, by the way, had joined the business prior to that. Her background is very different than mine. To save time, I'm not going to go into her story. If you want to hear that, I can tell you afterwards. But ultimately, I decided to shut down the China business, and that is the part of the story that needs to be drawn to a close. And then I come into the executive search model back to Chicago, where the idea is that I've managed to build, in a lot of ways, a very successful business in China, and I will turn that experience into helping either American companies looking to recruit Chinese executives to manage their operations in China, or Chinese companies that are investing in the United States to recruit executives to help them run their American operations. So that's the model that we come back on, and that's something that we still work at developing. However, another trend came our way, which ties into a lot of what Lloyd's experience is instead of the economic trend of the courtship of China and the Chinese and American economies, that economic trend that really pushes our business, which was unexpected, is the retirement of the American baby boomer. So there's a huge amount of entrepreneurs, and even not entrepreneurs, baby boomers are sitting in the top of organizations longer than they should, without considering retirement plans. More importantly than that, without considering succession plans. So you get a circumstance oftentimes where in companies, in large cap organizations, down to very, very small organizations, where when senior leadership retires, there's going to be a talent vacuum at the top. Our services today cater towards addressing those issues. We help companies find trustworthy leadership for their organizations. So I actually did not do a good job of watching the clock. I think I'm roughly at about 10 minutes now. So I'm going to come back to the riddle. For me, that riddle, the traveler and the road to success versus the road to failure, in the face of two strangers, unknowing who is honest and who is dishonest, is the true problem that we all face, almost on a small level, on a daily circumstance, but more importantly, when you're talking to people like I was, when the future of my business depended on making the successful decision of ultimately someone who said, you can trust me, but really they're just a stranger. So how do you navigate that is something that I think is a riddle that I'm still learning. I help clients with it, but really the way I help clients with it is I spend a long time getting to know people. And that's the answer. The answer to the riddle is interesting. And I'll preface this before I come to the conclusion here. So I'm not so certain the answer to the riddle is as relevant to business circumstances as the riddle itself is. The way you successfully navigate this question, just again, you have two roads, you don't know which is which. You have two people, you don't know who's honest and who's dishonest. You get one question. The solution is, it doesn't matter which person you ask. You ask either at random, and you say, tell me which road the other person would ask me to go down. It would tell me to go down if I wanted to go down the road to success. And then you go down the opposite road. And the reason this works is that you can convince the truth-telling person to honestly lie. So if you ask an honest person what a liar is going to say, then that honest person can say, well, that liar is going to tell you this lie. If you ask the dishonest person what the honest person is going to say, they're going to give you the same answer. And whichever person you ask, they're going to point to the road to failure, and you walk down the opposite road. And I'll close.
So I have two observations.
Mhm.
One is on the riddle. Unfortunately, we never know that there's a purely honest and purely dishonest, and so we never know what to pick. But going back to your talk, I think one of the great lessons of that is that you really can't start a business, and you certainly can't build a business without knowing where you're going. I mean, if you don't know the end goal, like you gave in your example, if you don't know the end goal, the odds of you getting there are very remote. There's the old story about the airline pilot who gets on the intercom and says, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we're making great time. The bad news is I'm lost. It's the same notion. I mean, you really can't. There's no way that you can build it. You build a company totally differently if you're thinking of going public, thinking of getting acquired, thinking of selling it to your employees, all the variants that there are. You build a business totally differently each time. So there's no way you can just kind of wing it. And that's the other point that was raised is, how do you get the advice to know which way to wing it? And my answer comes from you. I mean, you said it. And that is, yes, advisors like to get paid, but not necessarily in money. Many of them will take a piece of stock in order to be an advisor, be on your board of directors, or otherwise help you through the chore that you're going through. So it's not as difficult as it sounds if you're willing to, there are a lot of people who are not willing to give up a share of stock in their company because they think it's going to be worth so much. And the truth is it's going to be worth nothing if they don't give up those shares to the people that could help them get there.
That's true. What I would have done differently if the plan of that business was kind of formed as it was being built, which is not something I would advise again. I mean, sometimes you have a good kernel that you don't know exactly how it's going to grow, and you can work with that a little bit, but before you get too big, you need to think about where you're going. If I were in a circumstance where I could go back to the point where I was talking with Chinese investors again, what I would have done differently was fallen back here and got my funding here, found my advisors here, and then gone back under that premise.
Thank you, Bill.
Mhm.
I thought I showed you. Oh, there you are.
Hey, Lloyd. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Do
Good.
you mind being next?
Sure. I'm Gia. So I'm part of the Challenge as well as J-Group Squared Partners. So I wanted to share just from investing point of view, seeing the entrepreneurs here, seeing entrepreneurs in China, and I wanted to share a little bit of personal, experience. So the past past week, I was in China and I saw a AI company, artificial intelligence company, making a presentation. So they started with, the awards they got. It's a full Tsinghua University team, and they've won every AI competition known to man. So the whole page started with their awards. Then they went into their core their products are visual recognition, using artificial intelligence. So they went into the 10 fields they're in. They are doing color pattern, texture, fashion, humanless shopping, and 5 other areas. So everything looks great, but so far they couldn't find founding. So why? So I came back and one of the entrepreneurs on the ZH platform, who's a newly member of ours, has a very similar company that's doing artificial intelligence, and they offer very similar product, visual recognition, and this MIT, Chinese background MIT team. So with the question, I went back to this other entrepreneur, and she shared they're finishing their A round with I can't disclose now, but major e-commerce firm, investing about $10 million in them. So she shared her view on that. One, they're going to all kinds of competition, and they shared their strategy. Kind of let everyone know their going to market strategy. Two, algorithm based on the testing from all these investors. This MIT team has a better and a faster, more accurate algorithm. Three, which is a key one, that the CEO of this Chinese company, it has a very broad vision. So every potential customer that goes to him saying, can you do this or can you do that, which is probably not the best use of their time. Just because there's one customer asking for something, they commit a lot of time and energy doing it. So they're spreading very thin, and they don't necessarily do one thing very well. So with that explanation, I kind of looked at the companies that I've advised or invested, and realized that when you're at the startup stage, figuring out the core competency and figuring out a path, a core path, and stick to that path is so important. So just wanted to share this one perspective from this very interesting example that I recently experienced.
Thank you. It's a good lesson, being specific about your product and not so specific about your customer. it's a lesson all too many companies fail to learn. It's always too late. Jane?
All right. Okay. I also just came back from China 2 days ago. Yeah, Jia was with me.
I came from the North Shore.
And we have, last time we were having our advisory board meeting, several of them are in China were in China with me for the Zage Island Annual Changemaker Summit. Even John,
Yeah.
David represented you very nicely in the Zage Island Summit.
Good job.
Yeah, I made a speech actually even in Chinese.
Yeah.
He's an investment banker talking about that fund, environment fund, and it was very impressive to the crowd. So I brought a few of them already to China as we see it. And so for my part of sharing today, I want to talk about China's whole entrepreneurial history combined with my personal story. I will finish that within 10 minutes.
I can't wait to see
I
that.
can talk for an entire day. I will see how I do it, but I think I can do it within 10 minutes. So in China this time for the Zage Island, I think a lot of them know the Zage Island history already. It started from the Chinese Entrepreneurship magazine in early 90s, started from the two, reporters from the Entrepreneur magazine. Comes down, that was 20 years. 20 plus years. So 2012, they founded the Zage Island and to build that into an in-depth networking community for entrepreneurs. I think in this year's annual conference, I was both emotionally and mentally so overwhelmed and moved by a lot of the key messages came out of the speakings and the themes of the event, not just because of those are major influencers, but also it resonates so much with me as as an entrepreneur growing up in China, went through all these historical transitions. I could fix on one key point. I know there's so much information, take time to reflect, but one key point is the 40s. This year is the 40th years anniversary of China's open door policy, if anybody remember, 40 years ago. So there's one ceremony is, in China, when you turn 40, you become like 40而立. How do we find? Like you establish, when you're 40, you are established person, similar, So this whole ceremony at the closing ceremony is about Chinese entrepreneurs turned 40. Along with the Chinese open door policy, turned 40. 40 means we are more wise, we are, more established. We think more, in a broader way, just not financially established, but also make a social impact. So that whole ceremony was just amazing. And they also had this poem. The founder of the Zage Island wrote that poem. I shared a lot of it in my social media though. But I shared one particular paragraph that speaks so true of me. Somebody said a comment at my sharing site, you guys are like doing the word of the God. But I can tell you that paragraph. I think if we have two entrepreneurs in the crowd, you will agree with me. Because I'm also, addicted to do things, creating from 0 to 1. That's kind of like, I love doing that part, 0 to 1. Beyond 1, we have a professional team taking care of it. But anyway, that whole poem talking about we love creating, we love creating new things. We create new culture, new products, new history, and creating is in our blood, in our bone, and our entrepreneur. That's the whole part of that poem. It was very beautiful. They were reciting that poem like 1,000 people there, trying to I think 1,000 entrepreneurs there trying to memorize this special moment of our entrepreneurship turned 40s in China, which started from 1978. So this whole involvement, I think I'll touch a little more later, but this whole involvement of Chinese entrepreneurship, it's the same speed as Chinese economic development. If you look back at how Chinese economy developed over the last 40 years, if we compare with the US, I think it's much faster. In terms of entrepreneurship, how they evolved even from 10 years ago when we were in China with Jack Ma hailed like a rock star. As of today, it's already evolved so much more from that 10 years ago. So what I want to say is now I come back to my personal story and I go back to the historical story. You make sure I'm still stay on time because I really have so much to share. Especially I'm fresh out of the conference from China. So my father, you mentioned about your father. That reminded me of my father. I never thought about I was that much influenced by his entrepreneurship. He actually started his own business as the first group entrepreneur in mid-80s in my town, like construction and interior design, that type to do with real estate. And we end up building the highest building in the town. But I think I was influenced even back then when I was in high school. In the summer, I would work in his business as a part-time kind of intern or something. And I started my first company in 1993, partnered with Han Feng, Sonny Han, who is already successfully became a billionaire now, doing online training. But back then, the notion is still like it's more glorious to work for a state-owned company, to have an official job. So I still took that traditional success route, even though I was working on an entrepreneur, company at the same time. So I worked for China Daily, Siemens, and I came here. So even this morning, I haven't had an interview with American Magazine asking me about all this entrepreneurship. I just told my story this morning to this reporter. But I truly became an entrepreneur, which I mean an all-in entrepreneur. It's in 2001 when I started ChinaWise, the consulting company to help U.S.-China do business with each other. That's 2001. So through that has been 17 years. 17 years have been mostly helping U.S. companies do business with China and Chinese companies do business with U.S. Since I have been more focusing on the market entry strategy, when I was sharing my experience in China with the ZH Island leadership, it occurs to me that market entry is all about entrepreneurship. Very few consultants are willing to focus on that area because of the high risk, high failure rate, and and it could take a lot of time, end up with nothing. It's a lot of lessons learned from American companies and even more from Chinese companies. Because even no matter you are a public companies, when you go to a new market, emerging market, it starts from ground zero. You build everything from ground zero. I'm the one advising them through that entry. And especially from China to the US, I talked to a lot of the executives. As a state-owned companies in China, they're treated as very honored, all of that. But when they came to the US, they also have to start from ground zero. So I actually have been advising those companies for the last 17 years. And when the reporter, they asked me, how could you be different, like, make those business happen, those deals closed? I said, I didn't really work with that many companies because everyone basically requires you to be all in, to be fully engaged into all the details, to be part of their team, truly to be part of their team, especially for the initial year. So every project is almost like an entrepreneurial project. So that comes to ZH Island again. I think the reason I started this ZH Island US, I was involved from its initial establishment in 2012. The reason I started this one is because I think with all those experience and all those previous networks and experience, it comes to a point that it finally can build it through two platforms, which based on trust. And once you mentioned about the riddle, where do you go? Because you couldn't trust anyone. And this is a platform I feel we can build the trust for the members on both countries, and it can scale up what I have been doing. Because last 17 years, I didn't really handle that many clients because the trust building, the project initiation, the execution all takes tremendous amount of my time and the team's time. So that's the key that I started doing this ZH Island. To close, if the time is up, to close, at this ZH Island annual conference, I talk about the 40 years mark, represents the whole entrepreneur, network in China is becoming more sophisticated. One quick example is during the evening we have this 正和署. It's like for private board meeting. There's 3 questions being discussed by like close to 1,000 members. They divide each into a 10 people group. I was impressed by the 3 questions were done by the research from what are entrepreneurs today care the most about. I guess if anyone can guess the first question, what's the first question out of this research? That's why they're discussing that first question. Chinese entrepreneurs care the most. No.
Stability.
Work-life balance. That's a first. Really?
For an entrepreneur?
Yes. That's the
There
first
is no-
question. That's 3 questions.
There is no, that doesn't exist.
See, no, well, I mean, to put it this way, Zhisland is really established group of entrepreneurs. They're already made their financial, success. A lot of them already.
It's easier to balance it.
I mean, seriously, that's the very first question, and I was so happy because 5 years
No,
ago
but
I
I
did.
think George is absolutely right. I mean, what the best you can do when you want to have balance
Right.
is devote some years of your life to that and some years of your life to this.
Right.
Overlapping is very difficult.
Well, I can tell you there are 10 people in my group. I can tell you the leader of the group said he run 50 marathon. And there are 4 people of us sitting right here. Each one talk about kids. All 4 of us have 3 kids in China. Think about that. And all of them have 3 kids. And each one have their travel. I mean, that's a more established group of entrepreneurs. I agree. But I think work-life balance.
But you've left out an important ingredient. May I?
Please do. Yeah.
And that's Joe.
Yes, I did. I did.
And you talked earlier about parents and support.
Right.
With parents, the support might be money, but the other support is not telling their kid not to quit the job and go start a business, because parents are very worried about such things. But spousal support is extraordinarily helpful, especially if you want to, quote unquote, balance. But what you did is you have a balanced family,
Yes.
not a balanced gene.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I can share with you, there is another 10, the 10 people in my group. There's one guy asked what is his label. Everybody put yourself one label. What is it? He said, to serve my wife. He support her entirely for business. That one person run 50 marathon. One person, my label is to serve my wife. And they're full with 3 kids.
Maybe that person is running away from their spouse.
I was very impressed.
The other important thing I think you talked about is, and there's a lesson I want to make sure we all understand. You talked about the right time in China. And that's been said a million times. And everyone, if you think about it, the curve of growth of entrepreneurship in China is like this.
Right.
And when you look at the United States, the curve is still more like this.
Right.
Because we had our spurts way back, and we have a 100-year history or more of entrepreneurship as opposed to a 40.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So
right.
the key to this, though, is that it's neither. The key to this is all too much that's wrong in our world is that we think binary. We think it's this or that. And the truth is it rarely is. And here, too, joining Chinese and American business, it's not binary. It's picking the best that each has to offer and bringing it together. And that's more difficult. It's easier to pick one or the other. But if you can do that, I think you'll have greater success.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Can we open it up for questions, discussions? And questions, incidentally, I want to make sure we understand 2 things about questions. They're not just, can I get some more information? They're also, I think you're out of it. You're way off. You're wrong. That's a question in my mind too. And then the second thing, my favorite quote ever is from another Nobel laureate, Elie Wiesel. And somebody asked him a very difficult question. It was almost impossible. And his answer was, questions are what bring us together. Answers are what drive us apart. So with those 2 thoughts in mind, how about some questions? Yeah.
I have a question
You
for
asked all the
you.
questions.
I have a question for you, but for the group. 'cause
Okay.
Somebody else might have a different answer than you do. What's the difference between an entrepreneur and opportunist?
Well, there are two differences. The first is opportunist has bad connotations. Just in our vernacular, when you say someone's opportunistic, it sounds like they're trying to take advantage of people or they're trying to get the upper hand unevenly. And the truth is, in entrepreneurship, opportunists are people who see opportunities, position themselves to take advantage of them, and by doing so, actually help lots of other people. So it's the opposite of the connotation. So I think entrepreneurs are successful entrepreneurs are opportunistic, but that's not a pejorative. That's not negative.
I would.
Very wise answer.
Pardon?
Very wise.
I would add to that I think everybody has a sense of opportunism, but some people are more strategic about it. Yeah, you look at what opportunity. So a recruiter, right? And so you see resumes. One of the first things you look for is how many job changes has this person had. And it is a red flag for anybody who's ever been in a position of hiring before that if this person's had 3 jobs in 3 years and you hire them, they're probably going to leave after a year. The logic is pretty obvious. That person looks like an opportunist and saying, oh, a new job came along. That sounds great. That's a $10,000 increase in salary. That is not a wise decision. But that's not to say every single person on the planet does not want to have a higher status, higher income, a higher anything. We all want those opportunities, but people have the capacity to make poor decisions about what opportunity to seize and how often to seize them.
There's also a time factor. So the best example of or picture of opportunism, if you're old enough to remember this, is a merry-go-round. And they used to say the merry-go-round, you had to be there when the gold ring was available, and when you came around to grab the ring and take the opportunity. That was the picture of opportunism. And the truth is, once you grab the gold ring, it's not over. It's the beginning. So if you think of opportunist in the negative side of things, it's grabbing the gold ring and that's it. The truth is, it's the start of a journey or an adventure that we call entrepreneurship. And then you have to know what to do with that gold ring. You know, if that's your resources, how do you allocate them? How do you preserve them? How do you spend them, invest them, whatever it is you have to do. So it's just a pictorial way of dealing with it, I think.
I think an entrepreneur has to be opportunist. You have to be quick, identify opportunity, and quick action upon it, and quickly, and be prepared. Be always prepared from all aspects, financial resources, knowledge, everything. When good opportunities surface, you are able to act upon it.
So I want to go back to what I said in my opening. What you're referring to is a successful entrepreneur. And, you know, opening the next hot dog stand where it doesn't have to be so fast. It can take its time. It doesn't have to develop so quickly. And sometimes they do, but sometimes not. That's okay. That's a form of entrepreneurship, just not what you're thinking about.
I'd like to add a little riff on what you're saying there, Lloyd. I think there's a hugely negative connotation to the idea of failure that gets tossed around. Like success, a successful entrepreneur is only defined as a person who, you know, bootstrapped their business and sold it for profit, or took it public and is passing it on, or kept it and is passing it on to their kids. It's the financial, legal sense of success. I think the only real failure in the entrepreneurial sense, I mean, like, of course, you know, if you close your business like I did, you know, you can look at that as a failure. But I think in the larger sense of things, if you don't learn from it, you know, most people are built, their successes are built on a pile of failures, and a lot of the people who are the most successful are standing on a really big pile of failures. And the idea that you're going to get it right the first time, and that if you don't get it right the first time that you've been a failure is, I think, a stigma that really needs to get driven out of people's minds.
So you're 100% right. Fear of failure is one of the greatest barriers to even being an entrepreneur, let alone a successful one. But there's no great joy in failure. Now, don't get carried away with this. You'd like to succeed, and you can be successful without failing. It's just if you do fail, learn from it, as Phil was saying, and do something.
Mm-hmm. Okay, define the term success. When you say successful entrepreneur, I've heard that bandied about several times a day. Successful entrepreneur. Money or I go public and then just go sailing, or I take 10 companies in a row from 0 to 1, like you talked about. That's success. Family life balance without necessarily the money, but I did it.
But you just answered your question, because it's all of those for different people.
Right, right. For me, it's just if I have to, I can always do what I want to do and what I love to do. That's my.
When I was
That's
teaching,
success.
Yeah, I think that's more than anything.
when I was
You cannot
teaching a
measure
course
it
called
with the
Successful
mind.
Entrepreneurship at Kellogg, course I created, I had one session called The Right Thing. You know, and I wasn't teaching them what's right and wrong. I don't presume to do that. I was teaching them the signals that you're getting close to the line where over that it's going to be wrong. And how do you read the entrepreneurship to know how to stay on the right side of the line? And I still was challenged by teachers, not just students. Challenged, why do you have that in entrepreneurship? Because that's not part of entrepreneurship. Well, sure it is. And you know, we all know there are evil entrepreneurs who do things just to make money or just to get ahead in the game. But there are also entrepreneurs who care about their society, their family, and most of all, their reputation. And so it is part of entrepreneurship. And so all the things you said are goals of an entrepreneur or many entrepreneurs, but not necessarily all of them.
All right, let's look at the failure side then for a second. Jim Collins said in his book, Good to Great, that you have to have 3 things to succeed, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, the money to back the venture, whether it's your own or somebody else's, a skill set, and a passion. Well, you have to have all 3 of those or nothing. But having said that, even if you have all 3 and you go from 0 to 1 like you did, which you like doing, I would submit, Your Honor, that many entrepreneurs get to a point where they've Peter principled, and, and they don't know when to let go and go from 1 to 2 with another group, and because they just think that they have to do it all, and then that's what causes a failure.
Right.
They had the
So
skills.
let me take your statement and turn it back to you.
Okay.
Take those 3 that Jim Collins talks about and prioritize them for me. Which
Passion would be number 1.
Of course. And because the passion will bring you the money, it will bring you everything.
Right.
Now, it will also bring you to failure if you're passionate about something that doesn't make sense. So, you know, all of these have different elements to the same line.
But you have to know when to step. When you reach level 1, and you're happy with that because that's your skill set. You like doing that.
Right.
You have to be willing to back
I am
off.
very willing, yeah.
So,
But some people don't know.
Right, right.
so
That was
most
for you
people,
one.
no, most people don't know that. That's for sure. You all know who Jerry Reinsdorf is? He owns the Sox and the Bulls and great real estate developer in his day. So he's a friend. He came to my class once, and this issue came up from what a student said. And Jerry had a pretty good answer. He said, excuse me, I'm going to use an example that probably shouldn't be in a classroom and certainly not in a business school classroom. He said, so if I go to a casino and I bet $100 and in an hour it's $1,000, I take $100 and put it in my pocket and bet $900. That's a sensible approach to entrepreneurship. Now you might say, well, what if I don't make that $1,000 and I've got to go borrow it or invest it? Yeah, that changes the dimension somewhat, but it's still the same. So you're exactly right. You not only have to know how to get it moving in that direction, but when to take extra risks and when to take fewer risks.
And you learn that by, trying and by, having failures, all of that. When you mentioned that riddle, I've been really thinking about it. And I know the answer right away. I don't know if anybody would, agree on that riddle. You talk about one person here tell you this, one person tell you that. For me, I'm standing there. I just know which way to take. If I'm right from intuition.
Don't ever say that to an investor.
I just told an investor when I was in China, I was like, I'm not even looking for any investment. But anyway, I truly would know because I use the words like if you follow your heart, follow your instinct, that should exactly tell you exactly what you should do. But how to have that instinct takes years of building up. I think the last couple of years, I have been making my most judgments based on my instinct more, and it works a lot better than all of that analysis of what other people tell you. Earlier, you mentioned about, you should be always still go back to yourself. You have advisors here, you have 500 mentors here, there, all of those information and resources. Ultimately, eventually, you still need to sit down, reflect, be on your own, everything but be on your own, all in and all on your own. Think it all through. That actually is a lot easier.
Well,
to
but
make
there's
decisions.
before you get to your conclusion, there's a subpart to that.
Right.
And that is if you've selected your advisors or your board or whatever it is correctly, they will have totally
That's
different
true.
opinions.
That's true.
So you can't say we'll take the majority or we'll take
Right.
the average or whatever you want to deal with.
Right.
You're going to get a lot of input that goes left and right and everything in between.
Right.
So you have to make the ultimate judgment. That's what being a leader or entrepreneur is about. But it doesn't mean, it's not as crazy as if you roll dice 100 times, theoretically 50 will come up this and 50 that. It's not like that because you're adding the judgment question. So you learn from all this advice
Of course.
and you make judgments and they can make you fail sometimes, but that's okay if you learn about it and make the next
Quickly,
judgment.
So with all the accumulation of years of experience, knowledge, meetings, all of that, at some point you are able to make some decisions based on just yourself make some quick judgment.
So, I've been giving speeches lately and putting together a course for e-education in China on the subject of visionaries, business visionaries. And, the cover of my book has a crystal ball on it because I was trying to make a point. Not that you should get a crystal ball and believe it. That's not the point. The point is that that's not what really happens. It's not magic. It's not that you can, like Superman, see through walls and see what's on the other side of things. It's a collection of experience, failure and success, but it's a collection of experience that you learn from. And it's incremental learning. It's not just a learning. It's incremental learning, maybe about the same thing, maybe about multiple things. And yeah, we can talk about artificial intelligence and the beauty of, what everyone's pulling together out there from IBM to China and everything in between. There's a lot of it out there. I interviewed the head of global development for IBM. He responds only to Ginny, the CEO. And I couldn't resist. At some point, he was just trying to twist me around, and I wasn't going to be twisted. And I said, so you started out with data. You remember they had punch cards in the old days? You started out with data. You then went to information. And now you're at knowledge and intelligence. Do you think you can ever get to wisdom?
Oh my
He just stared at me like I was a lunatic. Just stared at me. Maybe it won't be in my lifetime. It won't be in my great-grandchildren's lifetimes. But maybe. But it's not going to quite be the same as this computer we've got. And so, yes, you can make judgment calls, but there's no magic. You will be wrong eventually.
Right.
We all will. And that's the problem. Investors, most of them are not sophisticated enough to distinguish between what you said at first and that. So if you say, I always know what's right, I'll give you an example of that. They will not invest with you. Here's the example. One of the greatest investments you ever could have made was Starbucks. Down a little bit now, but yeah. Not way down if you bought back then. So if you had invested $10,000, you'd have tens of millions of dollars today. It was a phenomenal run. And I've known Howard since the 80s, just after he formed the company. And he had lots of trouble getting investors. And when I say lots of trouble, hundreds and hundreds of people turned him down cold. And he's a good salesman. He's a great salesman, actually. If you've heard him on TV or anything, he's the kind of guy you'd buy something from. And he couldn't sell the stock. It was then a startup, of course, and it was a new concept and all that. And the problem was, and when I interviewed him, one of the things he said, I've got it on video. One of the things he said, I'm very good at instinct and envisioning things. I know when something is going to be good. And I knew Starbucks was going to be good. And I said, good for you. What good is that? Because nobody else could understand what you were talking about. He had it somewhere in here, he had it, but he couldn't pull it out and articulate it in a way that other people would buy into it. Now, eventually he got it right and the rest is history. But he really, you know, when I first talked to him, I don't know if any of you know this, but after he got a few stores in Seattle, you know where his next store was? Glencoe. And I happened to live in Glencoe at the time. So I knew him, so I went there the first day and every day after. One day we're walking the dog and this couple in front of us is saying, she's running across the street, she says, go in and get me a doppio. I didn't know what a doppio meant. So I handed the leash to my wife and I went in to find out what a doppio was. When I found out that it's a double espresso, I said, come on, we gotta go home. And we went home and I called Howard. We didn't have cell phones back then. I know that's hard to believe. I had one in my car, but it was fixed to the car.
Okay.
So we went home and I called Howard and I said, he said, what's that? I said, you formed a club. When I was a kid, I got together with other friends and we formed a club. And the first thing we did was create words that nobody else understood. And you did it. I mean, you know, now it's going into Frappuccino and things like that, but he did it with all those Ventes, Doppio, all those words he used. He created a club and he said, no, don't ever tell anyone that. I said, why? Well, if you've heard him talk about his politics, you understand that that would be too elitist for Howard and it would ruin the image that he personally likes to portray. But the truth is, that's what it was. And it wasn't until 2013 that I finally got him to agree not to call it a club, but to call it a place between house and work. And work and house, you're going backwards. And that is a club as far as I'm concerned. So everything he did there was club oriented, except you pay the dues by the cup instead of by the year. So sometimes people can get their idea solid as hell in their mind, and they just can't transmit it to people.
By the way, oh, sorry.
But no, I think it's also important, and I don't know how well you know the history, knowing when to step in and step out. So before Howard Schultz, Howard Bihar, the interactions there, and then him stepping out as CEO and then coming back. So part of it's knowing when to change and shift as well, which I think is important.
Well, but there's a lesson in that too. The first CEO after Howard was actually the guy who just died this year. I forgot his name.
There was another guy involved early on,
Yeah.
Howard Bihar.
Yeah, but after that,
Yeah, there was another guy that he switched over to.
and they had offices with a wall in between them. They finished each other's sentences. This guy got Howard's vision before Howard got his vision. And he came in as a CFO and then became CEO somewhere along the line. And Howard stepped back, and this guy ran it beautifully. When he left, they brought in a guy who didn't know Howard's vision and was told by the board, forget the vision, go out and make lots and lots of stores, meaning tens of thousands of stores. And they blew it with that. Because to do that, they have to do things that killed Howard's vision. And then he stepped back in and now out.
But Starbucks just opened their grocery store in Shanghai. When I was in Shanghai, my friend was so excited to show me. And there was such a long line, I couldn't even get in, honestly. I was like, I'm not going to wait in line under the sun for hours to get in a Starbucks, honestly. And I just, when I came
Grocery
back,
took on a new meaning to you.
yeah. And now they opened a new one in Beijing. And everybody was, in my friend circle, was sharing about their grocery Starbucks in Beijing. It was
So
phenomenal.
you or somebody, let's talk about what Jean just talked about. Chinese love for American brands. I mean, it's astounding to me. It's always been astounding how American brands sell in China. And to me, China has its own uniqueness, its own cultural value, but it buys American brands. And I'm talking about retail now. Buys American brands. What causes that?
Perception.
Perception of?
Perception of. It started with, first the perception of quality, perception of lifestyle. I think that's the core. It represents what people perceive as a different lifestyle.
So the first two American brands that were there were McDonald's and KFC,
People,
which we don't think of as quality.
it's a
I can tell you the magic.
perception.
I know the magic.
Yeah.
I know the magic.
Look at
What is it?
Well, I think you
Yeah.
probably
Let share. I
Yeah,
know
the
magic.
feeling.
Buick is a pretty tired old person's brand
Right.
in the United States, and GM sells more cars in China than it does in the
Yes.
United States.
Yes.
Cadillac,
Marquee
well, that's
brand
what-
is Buick.
Buick is the business car in China.
Well, it goes back to, because when GM was starting out in China years ago, and I asked some of their Chinese partners at the Shanghai Automotive, what is it with Buick? And they pointed me to the museum in Shanghai where the Communist Party was founded in 1921, and in the garage they have a well-preserved 1937 Buick. So the guys who were approving the deal remembered from before the revolution, this was the great brand.
Wow.
I think one of the things might also be explained by a statistic I heard recently. The entire population of the United States, what, 320 million, something like that? In China, if I have this correct, the number of people in the 22
He's right.
to 29 age group is equivalent to about that.
Yeah.
And that's the age group that compete to go to business schools, 22 to 29 years old. So we have just as many people in China between 22 and 29 competing to go to business school as there are in the entire country of the United States, which explains a lot of their hunger and their acumen and their desire to come to this country to go to school and get in. Some of the top students in this country at the top business schools are from the Eastern world. Okay, they take their knowledge and they're exposed to Western culture and they want to do something with their education, and then they go back and they plant the seeds of Starbucks and McDonald's, and it explodes because of the education that they got here and they take back with them.
I think I echo to Tom. I think it's a different way of thinking. It's the marketing strategy behind that is science, right? Like when you deploy the market strategy and go in market, and there's a science behind it, and in what percentage we see the increase, and then how we're going to invest into it. And it's not just that China love the American brand. I talked to when we recruit. I recently talked to people in England. They love American brands too, and it's people. My friend in French, they love Michael Kors, they love Kate Spade, and they share way more. Like the price is higher than the United States. So I think it is global wide. There's other countries are admire the quality and the even I don't say where it's gonna manufactured. We all know, right? So it's just a way of perception. But I think it's also science behind that. It's how the market strategy is, and it's just like when we all buy diamond for marriage, that means like trust and it means everlasting. Who invented that? I hope that, no offense, but that's Jewish people. That Jewish people. Why is that? Because they own the biggest diamond mineral manufacturing, right, in the world. So that's why how they sell this idea.
The South Africans own the South African government especially, and the De Beers company was a company. But they were the diamond cutters.
Right. So yeah, I mean that's.
Yeah, they marketed diamond is whatever. So, but on that point, I think it's very aspirational for Chinese to think and to look up to things that they think, because they are so strived to be successful. So when they look at successful brands, that's where they're inspired and aspired. And even here in the U.S., for years, if it's a neighborhood has a Starbucks, means this neighborhood is getting better. It's becoming, it's getting there.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the same thing. When I was in China, when you talk about Starbucks here in the U.S., it's between home and your office. In China, a lot of business meetings are done at Starbucks. So it's an extension to their meeting room in that sense. So it's, again, feels like this brand they branded themselves as a places where success is reside and where people can do successful business at. And the same, I think there are many brands in China. Howard Johnson as a hotel. One of my best 5-star hotel experience was in Ningbo, China, at a Howard Johnson hotel, 5-star hotel.
Wow.
You can't find a 1-star.
Yeah. You can't find
So meaning somebody smart in that whoever brought that brand to China figure out, okay, we should not come, because there is there's Super 8 or Super 8 in China and competed with the other budget hotels. That's terrible. Where Howard Johnson went in as a 5-star hotel. It's very. I think they have a very good business.
So let's look at changes in influence. So Up until now, Harley Davidson motorcycles, has been an iconic American brand. Now with politics, there's changes. So we were putting a tariff in here, now Harley Davidson's saying they're going to manufacture somewhere else. What does that do to perception of the Harley brand? Does it decrease it if they start manufacturing Harley Davidsons in China or anywhere else? Or does that still keep the image because the brand has been built up over years?
If it's built in China, I don't think that the brand, it's not going to affect the brand as much. I don't know what the
They're
other
also
Chinese
talking
think.
about doing it in Europe. And I'm wondering if that could enhance the brand.
Yeah, I think the brand has been integrated long time enough.
Well, I mean, I've got a different perspective on this. They are struggling. Harley Davidson is a business that's in trouble because no young person wants to buy their motorcycles.
But they created the young person's version of Harley. It's built on speed. It's been a disaster.
The Indian.
Because now-
I think it's a different company. But I'm not certain.
Well, one of the things with Harley is that they, like other companies, recognize one demographic fact, that the average Americans will never spend any more money in their entire life than they will between the ages of 45 and 50 years old.
That's true.
And that's the typical consumer of a Harley Davidson, a middle class, a middle-aged, midlife crisis, white male.
Females now too.
Guess what? Guess what? 100 million baby boomers in the United States, and Generation X, right behind the baby boomers, are 15 million fewer. And so they have not aged to the point where they're going to be buying. And even if all the next generation were of that age group in their 40s at their peak spending years, there's not enough of them to replicate the baby boomers' spending habits. So Harley Davidson and other companies like them that depend so much on baby boomers to buy their product are not dumb. They look around the world and say, where can we go in the world to sell Harley Davidson motorcycles? I'm guessing that regardless of this tariff issue, they would have gone elsewhere anyway because of a demographic decision.
That could be, and I met a guy the other day. I don't know if any of you know this company. It's here in the Chicago area. A blank on the name of the company. The guy's name was Michael, and they make a narrow car. Narrow car. So 2 cars could fit in a lane, and you could zip by like motorcycles do in between the lanes. And it solves, and you're right about the middle-age crisis or whatever, but it solves another problem that motorcycles used to solve, and that is you have to be capable of balancing to ride a motorcycle. You no longer have to. This guy was ingenious and came up with using Tesla batteries, which are very heavy, putting them in like ballast in a ship, and it takes care of the tilt of the narrow car. And they're going crazy with it. They're going to sell them like nuts.
And speaking of Tesla, I think that's another kind of a reverse of the Harley brand. Is I saw my friends are buying their kids the Tesla toy car for their birthday, and you can think about when those people grew up and they had this Tesla car when they were like 5-6 years old and driving those cars. And you can imagine what they buy when they had their first job, or when they are capable to purchase an expensive car. Who knows what a Tesla going to cost in the future?
Remember
But
that
that's
wonderful ad
branding.
by one of the car companies, Oldsmobile. It's not your dad's Oldsmobile.
Right.
Well, but go back one further. If you look at the whole General Motors model, how did they start people? Young people get a Chevy. You start making a little bit more money. You go Pontiac, and then there's Oldsmobile, Buick, and then if you've made it, you get the Cadillac.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that I want to add to the magic of why Chinese love American brands. So I do a lot of branding. It's really intentional, or you could call it strategic, psychological type of branding of American brands, what they did in China. When these brands first entered China, Chinese consumers are quite vulnerable about all this intentional marketing. So that's a really great strategic marketing from the American brands enter into China at a time the market not crowded with many good products yet. So the quality, brand experience, all of that are just the basics. So the right type of marketing quickly enter those quite unsophisticated consumers at the right time. And think about it, 1.5 billion people. If there are 100,000 people like something, they immediately tell their friends, family. Then 1 million people, when 1 million people like something, they tell 10 million people. The number, because we don't have such an density of population,
China has such a density of population. If one message get across, Chinese like to, like how to say, if one thing is good, everybody rush to it. If somebody said there's no salt in the future, remember there is one joke, not one true story about that. We are going to be short of salt. Every store out of salt. There are no baby powder. Every store out of baby powder. Think about the population of power purchase, and everybody do the same thing. So that can easily, build a brand
have there
success
been
easily.
instances where people have started rumors like that to make their product sell?
Oh, I think 1 year somehow the salt was sold out everywhere because of some reason I can't remember. And the people smuggling baby powders from Hong Kong to China, you need to be put in jail if you can't buy. Because the Chinese baby powder, they found there's some kind of ingredients was hurtful to the children.
It's same rush, exactly same story.
People same money.
It used to
Now
be
it's so easy to do marketing. But nowadays, no. They evolve so quickly. Because today it's much more 100% more expensive to enter China as when Starbucks entered China.
But I think the market is much more mature now.
It's mature so quickly.
Yeah, and then compared to what you mentioned, I remember those days, and even my friend asked me to buy those like baby powder things going back. But now there are a company like what's the English name? No, it's a high tech company, but they are not Alibaba, the other one, and they are Jingdong and Wangyi, NetEase. I think that's NetEase. Yeah, NetEase. They are now I believe for now, they're actually the #1 cross-country e-commerce platform right now. And then you don't have to have your friend to buy and kind of hide in your suitcase and bring it back to China. You can buy it on those e-commerce websites.
So nowadays, it's like if you have one product, we talk about like a knowledge. It's like you pay for a small class, online class, like $5 you buy a whole set of class. If one class got popular, you can sell millions of them. You can just one small class, you can make millions just when you sleep. So because of the size of the market, the density of the population, and the population's tendency to do the same thing. One thing become popular, entire country is popular. That's how if you can really feel the pulse of how a certain demographics, what people love, do it.
I get that, but I think back to the days when Japan, if it said made in Japan, we all thought it was terrible quality, and it was. And then all of a sudden, made in Japan became better quality than we had. So there are these fluctuations in markets, different markets. I was in a store I have to think, maybe it was in Hong Kong, but it might have been in Thailand. And a bus let off a group of people from Japan. And it was a purse store, very expensive purse store. And the shelves were filled. And within minutes, the shelves were empty and the people got back on the bus. And guys physically carrying them, brought in the next way to fill the shelves until the next bus would arrive. So the American brands, which these were very popular and everybody wanted to own them. And I don't know which brands they were exactly. And some of that is, you're right, all over the world. I mean, that is present all over the world. But I wonder if there isn't something else deep under it, not just perception of quality, maybe perception of lifestyle, maybe different perceptions, but there has to be something deep, right? When I think of perception ruling marketing, of course we have different laws today, I think of the guy during World War II. And this guy had tuna as his product, canned tuna. And other people were selling canned salmon. Salmon sold for more and at a higher margin than tuna. But nobody could get salmon because the Germans were bombing the ships in the shipping lanes and they just couldn't get salmon, but they could get tuna near the shore. And he came up with the brilliant idea of advertising XYZ salmon. Mine is guaranteed not to turn pink in the can. And until the government shut him down, he sold a lot of tuna as salmon. So sometimes perception is deceptive.
But the whole U.S. pop culture plays a major role. I mean, it's all American films, all those pirated movies. Early on. Nowadays it's not that.
Well, and music.
Yeah, music and pop culture is playing a major part in the younger generation.
Well, if you really boil it down to the basics, the urbanization of China, moving into the rural areas to the cities, communications become quicker and more efficient, and the internet, they see things in other parts of the world. I want that. I want that. I mean, you can explain it in simplest forms that way. People closer together in cities, on the internet, seeing things in other parts of the world. I want that.
Absolutely.
Well, there's a simple word that I'm surprised hasn't popped up yet, but it ties into everything. It's a status symbol. If you can wear an Apple Watch in the United States, it says something about your success, your personal image, et cetera, et cetera. Those same things have bearing in the Chinese market. And American products have positioned themselves to be products of status in China. So if you have the capacity to buy one, you're gaining face, you're adding personal value to your individual brand. And that's, if you go to James'
relatively easy to acquire. Lifestyle, harder. Do you work for a big corporate, or do you start your own business? Do you work for VC, or do you work for nonprofit? Are you a professor at university, or are you head of a nonprofit? So
Why do you do them as mutually exclusive?
You can do a few different things, but what you do is harder to acquire. You can acquire an expensive watch, you borrow some money, it's a nice watch, you buy a loan, and you could drive a Mercedes around, and everyone thinks you're successful. But your career is harder to BS. And your trip to Antarctica, what kind of people go to Antarctica? Generally, people who achieve some degree of success. And so I think status is sort of your lifestyle, more so than watches and cars.
But you're dividing lifestyle into two parts: work and
for some people, it's the same. And if it's the same, then it's a status.
Yeah, but I mean, there are people who will never leave their business because they lose their status in the business or their relevancy in the business world.
Right.
And they really should leave their business because there's somebody younger who could do a better job. So they're blinded by their status.
Well, if you take the follow his point up just a little bit, you talk about American brands, the word brand. To me, the word brand is an expectation of a certain experience. If I think it's a brand, I have an expectation in my mind that something cool is going to happen if I buy that particular product. It could be warm and fuzzy, it could be more concrete. So if there's an expectation in the mind of the consumer that something good is going to happen, whether strutting their stuff down the Madison Avenue or strutting their stuff in Kowloon, I mean, one or the other, it's an expectation that a certain experience is going to happen. That is a brand. Now, how do you get that expectation? Through communications, through the internet, through travel, through education, back and forth between countries. Because if there was never any travel and there was never any internet, I would suggest that the expectations probably wouldn't be there.
So the best story I've ever heard about brand is in a company that today, of course, has a website because everyone has a website, but is still 90% brick and mortar. And that's by Jim Sinegal of Costco. So when he would come to my class, and he did this every year, he blew us all away with his story about the brand Costco. And I don't know if you know this, but he swore, because it's part of his oath to his members, everyone's a member at Costco, that he will never mark up a product more than 14%. Never do it. If he can beat down the cost, the price comes down, the consumer benefits. And everyone's looking at him, and he said, and that's our brand. And there's a blank look around the class. And he said, well, let me show you a couple of videos, and it'll get the point across. And the first video is in a drugstore, like a Walgreens, CVS, and there's a medicine that solved a big disease, and it cost $350 per unit. And you had to take it once a month or something. And that was it. And then he goes to Costco and shows the price there, and it was $15. And he said, we beat down the cost. I'm sure Walgreens beat down the cost. But we promised never more than 14% markup. And one of the students said, well, charge $100. It's still a fraction of a $3+ at Walgreens. And he said, no, I made a promise. And then he shows the second video. This is what tied it together. Ever been to the gas stations at Costco? The line is always out into the street. And this is a reporter. This isn't Jim's video. This is from a news station. Reporter goes up to a guy in a car with a microphone. He says, "So what are you doing here?" He said, "I'm here to buy gas." He said, "Oh, can anyone buy gas?" He said, "No, you have to be a member of Costco." He said, "Oh, so you're a member of Costco. Does that mean you can't buy gas elsewhere?" He said, "No, I can buy gas anywhere." He said, "Well, why do you come here to buy gas?" He said, "Because it's so much cheaper." He said, "Oh, really? How much is it?" He said, "I don't know." That's a branch. Good point.
I can add to that, then you can wrap up. There is a Chinese brand exactly like that. I was at Xiaomi, the Xiaomi brand, the Lei Jun. I was at the Xiaomi entire day with the Zhisland business college students. That's the price promise they kept. And I'm very impressed. A Chinese brand can evolve to that type of status. It was exactly the same concept and execution. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you to all of our speakers. And thank you to all of you for your questions and for being here. And I hope the lesson is that between China and the US, there's a lot of similarity and there's a growing similarity. And there'll always be differences. That's part of global business. But no less so, no more so than relationships with any other country. There will always be some differences, but I actually see them both going in the same direction in many ways. So I look forward to seeing you all at future meetings, future events. And thank you, Jing, for hosting it. And unfortunately, I have to leave. I've got a conference call in 10 minutes. I've got to be in the car.
All right.
But I hope you all enjoyed the opportunity to
all the speakers and all of you come here for this event, and we definitely look forward to seeing you in our future events, and also join us for little networking. We have a little snacks for you.
Friday drinks.
Yeah.
And scan this so we can add you all to our group. And also, if you are non-members, there is a small fee. That will just go to badge. You will.
We will share a lot of our
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I guess it's not
Let me know. So,
yeah, I mean, so did you register for this? So you could just because I mean, it says we $25. We didn't want to use Eventbrite because if you ticket through Eventbrite and PayPal, then there's two intermediaries that take up money. So it's like, yeah, no, so I mean, the ticket, yeah, the ticket. I think the ticket. If you just give me your business card, you want me to send you yes, China-wise, but close enough.
Feel free.
Send
So, J-Square, what's that?
PER.
Okay.
Her?
That's what they want to talk about.
I don't have a company.
比较正式，比较 formal， 比较有过程。对，他们比较有要求，真的有要求。